My name is Ruth Faden. I'm the founding director of the Berman Institute of Bioethics at Johns Hopkins and a co-lead on the PREVENT project, which you'll hear about in a little bit. It's my great pleasure with Shirley Sylvester, who will introduce herself in a minute. We are the co-chairs of this workshop, and it's our great pleasure to welcome you all, those of you who are here on site, and for those of you who have joined us virtually to this important workshop. I've got two tasks initially. One is to give you a little orientation to the Forum on Drug Discovery, Development, and Translation of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, which is the host of this workshop. And then I have to go through a little bit of the COVID protocol of the Academies. So first, the Forum on Drug Discovery, Development, and Translation focuses on key problems and strategies in the discovery, development, and translation of drugs. The Forum offers a neutral venue where stakeholders in government, in academia and industry, foundations, consumers, and patient groups can meet to discuss and confront issues of mutual interest and concern. The Forum's function, among others, is to help educate the public, the press, and the policy community. The Forum does this often through the conduct of workshops and other activities where the Forum brings together leaders to focus on to bring attention to substantial or critical areas of drug development and to foster collaborative activity to understand and address these issues. In accordance with National Academies procedures, an independent planning committee was formed to organize the current workshop. And if we could just get the slide that shows the membership of our working committee, our planning committee. I think there's a slide that comes on at this point. But if not, it'll come on later. Shirley and I, of course, want to extend our gratitude to everybody. Shirley can do it again when the slide comes up, for your hard work and commitment, those of you on the planning committee, and also to the staff of the National Academies, especially Andrew March, who is constantly in motion to make sure that this workshop is as engaging and impactful as possible. A quick word about terminology. The Forum uses the term drug, as does the FDA, to be inclusive of vaccines and biologics, as well as non-biologic pharmaceuticals. So that the Forum uses the FDA convention. We are following that convention in this workshop. So when the word drugs is used, please translate in your head the larger understanding of drugs to be inclusive of biologics. So that's the background there. Now, finally, for my initial comments on the pandemic, unfortunately, it is still with us. So here is the National Academies policy. Those of us attending in person are strongly encouraged to wear a mask while indoors at the Keck Center, unless you are eating, drinking, or speaking at a microphone. So that is the preference of the National Academies. If you need a mask, please stop by the registration desk. They have them apparently in abundance. Also, if you have not used an at-home rapid antigen test before coming to the meeting today, and even if you have, please consider doing so tomorrow morning before you come. Obviously, don't come if the test results are positive. Just to reassure you, the National Academies buildings have been upgraded with the highest level of filters that are compatible with the HVAC system, and there are additional air purifiers in all the rooms that we will be meeting. When it comes to meals, if you would prefer to eat out of doors, we'll be provided with takeaway packages, and we can go to the National Building Museum lawn or the National Law Enforcement's Memorial or to the Judiciary Park. We're in a very lovely area for those of you who are unfamiliar to take a walk or a block or two and have picnic lunches if you would prefer. Of course, if any of you find over the course of the meeting that you're experiencing any kind of illness symptoms, please notify the workshop organizers and promptly depart from the building. Many of you, and here I'm talking to, I'm not sure how many, but many of you out there are taking advantage of the option of virtual participation in this workshop. And to reassure you as well, the National Academies have made significant investments in new equipment in meeting rooms to accommodate interactive hybrid meetings so that the experience for those of you who are not in the room will hopefully also be as engaging as possible. At this point, I'm going to turn my speed reading here over to my wonderful co-chair, Shirley Sylvester.
Thank you, Ruth, and good morning, everybody, and thank you so much to the organizing committee and all the committee members who work relentlessly to get to this point. We have been working together for quite some time, since December of 2021, to get this meeting up and running. So my name is Shirley Sylvester. I'm a Senior Medical Director for Women's Health at Johnson & Johnson. And my function is within the Office of the Chief Medical Officers that strives for ethical and safety and safe principles about the use of our medicines. So let's get back to today. So when we think about why we're here, so just remember that in the United States, about 4 million people, pregnant people, give birth every year. And of those 4 million people, 70% of them take prescription medicines at some point during their pregnancy, either because they have a chronic condition that they need to get medications for, or because there are conditions that arise during pregnancy and it provides the need for them to take medications. And they make that decision without being fully informed on the safety and efficacy of those medicines during pregnancy. So how do we get to this point? So I'm sure many of you here in this room are familiar with the thalidomide situation. The thalidomide was used in the 50s and 60s for morning sickness and for other issues during pregnancy. But we bring this every time we are in these meetings. But it's important to remind ourselves why this is an important scenario or situation. Thalidomide did cause birth defects in the fetuses of women who took the drug. That dramatic case led to a blank statement of that clinical research is too risky to conduct in pregnant and lactating people, and as a result, that is one of the reasons why pregnant and lactating people are continuously excluded from clinical research, to the detriment of the safety of pregnant and lactating people, since if we're not able to really collect evidence on safety and efficacy, it is really impossible for not only for the pregnant person, but also for their healthcare providers to make informed decisions about their care. So this gap in evidence really forces pregnant and lactating people, again, to make these risky decisions. So to this day, really the field of maternal health and women's health in general suffer from this gap. And Ruth will explain in a little bit a number of efforts that have been ongoing over the past several decades to address this knowledge gap. But progress has been made, but unfortunately, we still have a long way to go. And the purpose of today is that we really get really practical about what can we do to advance the field. So over the course of the workshop, we will really aim to build the momentum of the past efforts. We're here still during COVID-19, and COVID-19 has uncovered or exacerbated the need for having evidence in pregnant and lactating people. So this is a good time to really do this. So I'm going to pass it on to you, and Ruth is going to walk us through some of the efforts.
At least I know some of you are well aware, the National Academies actually has. Sorry. Am I on now? Good, thank you. So I'm sure many of you are aware that the National Academies has actually been in this space for a long time. There's a pretty long track record of work on the part of the National Academies on gender equity in health research. The first efforts date to the mid-1990s, a 1994 Institute of Medicine, as the medical part of the National Academies was called at that point, report called Women and Health Research, Ethical and Legal Issues of Including Women in Clinical Studies. So that mid-1990s report made a series of recommendations to create greater representation of the health interests of women in the national research agenda and in clinical trials. It included recommendations specific to people that are pregnant. So within that report, there was already specific recommendations for how to begin to address the gap in evidence for people who are pregnant. A point that was made in that report, that we made in that report, I should share that I co-chaired that report, so that dates me, I guess, but also indicates how long some of us have been at this, bears repeating, because I think it's a good watchword for our work over the next few days. And that is that the goal of inclusion cannot and should not be merely cashed out in terms of some kind of numerical representation that we know we're there if X percentage of pregnant people or X percentage of women are in a study. That's not the point. The point, the big picture goal is that there be fair representation and real commitment to the health interests of people who are pregnant in the research agenda. Sometimes that means inclusion in a clinical trial that is not directed at pregnant people, but where it makes sense for pregnant people to be in it. Sometimes that means a research agenda that's specific to pregnancy or to lactation, same issue. So the goal is on an evidence base that, to the extent is possible, is comparable to the evidence base for adults who are neither pregnant nor lactating. That's the prize, the eye on the prize. Now, many of the recommendations of the 1994 report, which did push for this broader understanding of inclusion, were in fact taken up. However, there was one big exception. None of the recommendations specific to narrowing the evidence gap in pregnancy gained traction. None of them, okay? Now, fast forward 15 years, it's now 2010. The Institute of Medicine revisited the state of women's health research with the publication of another report called Women's Health Research, Progress, Pitfalls, and Promise. That report did, in fact, find progress had been made towards gender equity in research for select diseases. However, the report concluded that for some health conditions, indeed for many health conditions, there was still not what the report then called gender equity, and that in particular the health needs of pregnant persons was found to be inadequate in terms of the examination of the research agenda of the country at that time. In the intervening years, numerous groups of clinicians, scientists, advocates, bioethicists, lawyers in the U.S. and around the world have been working to narrow the inequitable evidence gap in pregnancy and lactation, including the PHASES project that focuses specifically on HIV/AIDS, the PREVENT project that focuses on vaccines against pandemic threats, and we'll hear a little bit about both those efforts later in the meeting. Now, very importantly, in 2016, Congress mandated in the 21st Century Cures Act the establishment of a pivotal committee, really, called the Task Force on Research Specific to Pregnant Women and Lactating Women, which is a mouthful, so it has come to be known as PREGLAG. And I'm sure everybody here is familiar with PREGLAG. PREGLAG was given the specific remit to provide guidance on federal activities, so this is internal to the federal government, related to identifying and addressing gaps in knowledge, excuse me, with respect to safe and effective therapies for pregnant and lactating people. You will be hearing more about PREGLAG and its specific recommendations later in this meeting. It really is a pivotal jumping off point for a lot of our discussions. Meanwhile, in May of this year, a policy commission convened by the University of Birmingham in the UK released a report on this same topic, on evidence gap problems for pregnant and lactating persons. Excuse me. This commission makes 8 big recommendations that we should be taking a look at, not in this meeting, but just in general as we move forward in the U.S. here, including a commitment to de-risk insurance processes for clinical research, that is to say, to address liability, which we will be talking about, to allow pregnant people to participate in most clinical trials, and to also expand the use of clinical data to answer research questions about pregnancy and lactation. We'll be addressing that in this meeting as well. Now, recently, a 2022 National Academies report called Improving Representation in Clinical Trials and Research, Building Research Equity for Women and Underrepresented Groups, found that the exclusion of pregnant and lactating persons from clinical trials continues to impede the generalizability of clinical trial data and undermines the ability of pregnant and lactating persons to receive evidence-based health care. What we're basically doing really quickly now is showing an arc of work, right, over a 25-plus year period in which the problem keeps getting called out, recommendations keep getting made. There's some progress, but there's not enough progress. As you will hear throughout this workshop, this inequitable gap in evidence, which was, as I said, first called out over 25 years ago, has had a profound and in some cases even catastrophic set of negative consequences for the well-being of pregnant and lactating people, as well as for their offspring, their babies. We need look no further, as Shirley already referenced, than the COVID-19 pandemic to illustrate this point. Later in this workshop, we will hear more about how pregnant and lactating people were excluded from COVID-19 vaccine trials and how this decision resulted in unjustifiable delays in access to vaccine for pregnant and lactating people, even as the research continued to show that pregnant people were at elevated risk of severe COVID-19 disease. As someone who was trying from the inside to advocate for the interests of pregnant women in public health policy circles, I will say that the absence of evidence, and I know we'll be hearing about this more later in the workshop, the absence of evidence is just a terrible stumbling block for public health authorities as they make their policy decisions. This public workshop is intended to provide a venue for stakeholders to examine the current state of the evidence and to make progress on this in this space. I'm delighted to say that this workshop is intended to provide a foundation for a forthcoming study on this topic, which was requested by Congress in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2022. Hopefully we'll hear more about that at the end of the meeting. So, Shirley.
Thank you, Ruth. And getting back to the workshop and how the 2 days are gonna flow. Well, first of all, I would like to say that we want to include a variety of perspectives. We know that there are several members of the scientific community and the academic community and patient community in general that are impacted by this issue. So we will have representation from different voices today, from the federal government, from academic institutions, from industry, and from people who had experienced firsthand the having to make decisions about use of medicines during pregnancy and not having the evidence. So we will hear from people who were in that seat before. So we're going to start by highlighting the knowledge gaps. During pregnancy and lactation. And then we're going to be looking at the laws and regulations that are governing drug research. And then as the day progresses, we're going to be looking also into the liability concerns, both real and perceived liability concern from private and public stakeholders in conducting clinical research. And also we'll end with practical short and long-term opportunities. So we'll begin with an overview of the knowledge, and then we'll pass it on to the sociocultural and legal and the regulatory framework that surrounds the topic. And then tomorrow, we're going to end today actually with some working groups. Both people who are in virtually and people who also are here are going to participate because the intention is that we get as practical as possible. Tomorrow we'll start with the discussion of the implementation of the PREGLA recommendations, and then we'll get into more of case studies from different scenarios, so from mood disorders and for COVID-19 vaccine. So we want to be as practical as possible. So looking at two different populations, a population like if you think of vaccine, a population that is healthy for the most part, and that is the risk benefit is different than a population that has a chronic condition and needs to take medicines during pregnancy. And then we'll close the workshop with a discussion on the new approaches to generate robust evidence on safety and effectiveness. We'll made available a summary of the workshop is going to be available to you. And then just want to remind you that, unless specifically stated otherwise, it is assumed that all the comments and the personal views of the participants and not statements that are made on behalf of organizations and the National Academy of Sciences is committed to principles of diversity, integrity, civility, and respect for all of the activities. So, we can agree to disagree on several topics, but just to keep civility, of course. So back to you.
All right. So I think we got a note to kind of wrap it up. Was get the intent? Yes, Andrew was saying that. So let me just condense what I was next assigned to speak about. So the hope here is that we will get as focused as we can in the identification of possible effective strategies to move forward. So as much as we can do this, the idea is to identify potential solutions. I don't mean comprehensive, complete solutions, but potential policies, prescriptions that could be implemented across this broad space that might actually make a difference, again, in preparation for what might be hopefully a larger study. We just wanted to acknowledge two qualifications or limitations. The first is that we totally, in the planning committee, were aware and struggled with the fact that pregnant people and lactating people are not the same as populations. They have different interests, they have different needs in this space. We tried as much as possible to accommodate the differences between the population of people who are pregnant and the population of the people who are lactating, but I'm looking at some of my colleagues from the planning committee. It wasn't, we couldn't do it in a way that was just wholly satisfactory. Similarly, we're very aware, of course, and I'm going to use not the FDA use of the terms, that there are big differences between drugs and vaccines, between small molecule and biological medical interventions. We tried to get some of those differences introduced into the workshop, but with only a day and a half, we couldn't plumb all the regulatory and risk-benefit differences that distinguish between these two classes of medical interventions. So that's just a caveat. Going in, if you feel frustration on either of those topics, just know we share it. We would have wished to be able to go into more detail on the differences in both cases.
And great, just a couple of housekeeping items. So for the virtual audience, well, thank you for showing up in stride. A lot of you are virtual. So there will be questions via Slido. So please submit all your questions and comments. We want you to also be interacting with us. And if you have technical issues, there is an email address that's going to be posted on the Zoom chat for you to contact that person. For people here in the room, as you may have seen, food and beverages are outside. If you have questions, please speak into the microphone. And if you're not talking, please mute yourselves. And lastly, I just want to say that we are, again, the summaries of all of these are going to be with you at the National Academies for the website. And then I'll just pass it over to Dr. Leila Shaheen, who will be moderating the first session, making the case, the need for evidence generation. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoy the 2 days.